Good morning, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom to the 12 tribes of Israel scattered abroad and believers in Yeshua Messiah. Welcome to Hidden Manna. I am Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. Thank you so much for spending your Sabbath morning with us. I hope that you're having a good Sabbath morning, by the way, enjoying the day so far. Thank you for hanging out with us and part of our conversation. Good morning to everybody that's coming in online. As it is, we have a conversation here, and to do that, my dear brother Max is here with us. And let's see, there he is. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, man.
Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. How you doing today?
Good.
Good. Yeah.
Beautiful day here.
About to say, not so good over here, man. We're supposed to get snow today.
Oh, man. I feel for you, bro. It's not, it's a little cool out here, but it's nice and sunny. Beautiful day. Beautiful day. So I feel for you, bro.
One day it's 70, the next day is snow.
Yeah, well, that's, living in upstate New York. That's what you're going to get. But, we got a neat conversation today. We're going to be talking about the scattered tribes. We're talking about Israel. We're going to talk about the treasure because we're in the whole Passover season, and we had we've been doing stuff on Wednesdays, doing stuff on the weekend messages about a new priesthood that Yah is putting together in the story of the Gospels, getting ready to send out the 12 tribes, and not just the 12 disciples, but all the disciples and the apostles, and what that story really means. It is a hidden manna. It's something that is just very, very overlooked and sort of ignored, and yet it is a core part of the story. And we're going to get into that a little bit today.
That's right.
And but before we do that, I just want to make a comment about it's just all this stuff that's kind of going on around, and you got to be careful because like we were talking about before the broadcast started, again, just like everything else, it's so crazy the way our media and everything has become. You got to be careful what you say because you get kicked off of YouTube for even talking about what's going on in Europe and in other places, and but either way. It's kind of crazy. It's crazy what's going on. You hear all this talk of there's just seems to be there's these people that really want to push us closer and closer to a bigger conflict. And my hope, my prayer is that cooler heads prevail and that we don't go down that road. It's just sad. It's just very, 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 very sad.
With that in mind, also, it won't hurt every time you do go shopping. Just pick up a couple extra things for you and your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Use some wisdom.
Listen, no doubt what's going on now, and we really do need to keep abreast of this. Keep watch with everything that's going on, because there's major supply line. We already had supply line issues with the whole COVID thing. And now there's major issues between oil and fertilizer and food and chickens and eggs and coffee. And, this is going to be stuff, if you see the price of everything. If you go to the store, you guys know, if you go to the store, you see what the prices are. And
$8 for a quart of cream.
Really?
Oh, yeah, over here.
Wow.
Crazy.
I know gas is over $7 in Cali. We're not quite there yet. We're around $4.50, I guess, is maybe the most expensive that you'll pay now. But it's getting up there. It's absolutely getting up there. And things are going to get more expensive. So, yeah, it is definitely a good idea to, every time you go, stock up a little bit before the prices get really out of hand. But, there's this idea of normalcy bias where we tend to think that, things like that could never happen here. Right? Yeah. The way things have always been is the way they'll continue to be. We live in prosperity, and those crazy things they happen other places or at other times, but they don't happen to us. And listen, all of us just lived through the rejection of normalcy bias for the last 2 years, right? So that idea that it can't happen. Nobody wants it to happen. Nobody's looking forward for it to happen, but it is a good idea to be as prepared as you can. Again, there's not a whole lot that we can do about what's going on in the world. We're just little old us, but be aware of it because it's definitely gonna affect us. So I definitely want to I lift up a prayer just for the whole world, really, just for cooler heads to prevail, good wise men and women to make good decisions, But despite all of that, Father, things are going to work out the way they're going to work out, and we need to stay in Father. We need to understand
That's right. Amen. Amen.
What our walk is and who we're supposed to be.
Yep. And even before we get started, we want to take 2 seconds to give a shout out to Jaden Lopez.
Oh, yeah.
Tomorrow's his 11th birthday.
Happy birthday,
buddy.
Happy birthday, man. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
11. Wow. Before you know it, 21,
Yeah.
22, girlfriends, all the rest of that. You better be careful. Happy birthday, man. Happy birthday. All right. So, like I said, we've been going over, a lot of stuff in Thessalonians, looking at it very, very differently than what is how it is traditionally interpreted. We've looked at Matthew and Luke and all the stuff that Yeshua says about the temple. We've been going over John on our weekend messages, how the Master is preparing a new priesthood, and that concept is, I guess, it's understood or assumed by many today, but the mechanics of it, how it comes about, is very, very important, because what we've kind of done as church history has evolved. Rome did it. The Greek Orthodox did it. The Russian Orthodox did it. They all created another priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think some of the doctrine or some of the beliefs that they hold is that this is a Melchizedek, or they are a Melchizedek priesthood. They created all new ceremonies and different titles and this leadership, and yet the Scripture is emphatic that the Master destroyed that. Mm-hmm. He purposefully destroyed what had already been set up as a Levitical priesthood. The temple, all the rest of that, and he initiates another priesthood, the priesthood of the Spirit, but it's not what church history, how it has evolved. It's not about setting up a quote unquote new clergy, a new bishops and cardinals, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The vessel that Father used to initiate, to be the priest, to start this whole thing off and to train, because really the priesthood is all of us. We're all supposed to be walking as priests in the Father. But
Mm-hmm.
as the story goes, the priesthood he starts with is the house of Israel.
Yep.
And when I say house of Israel, I mean the Jews of that day. And we say Jews, again, I think I mentioned this last week, we say Jews, and I know that a lot of people in the Hebrew roots movement, we kind of separate the Jews of Judah as being distinct and different from that they don't represent all 12 tribes. And they do. They absolutely do represent all 12 tribes. Mm-hmm. Messiah said that to the apostles. One day you will sit in judgment over all 12 tribes, all of the house of Israel. And we know historically that droves of people, millions of people from the northern house that escaped Assyria came down to Jerusalem and became part of Judah and were intermixed. So yes, Judah is Judah, but intermixed in them is the whole house of Israel. And there is a house of Israel, the descendants of all those from Assyria, that are scattered all over the world and have become the fullness of the nations. Both of those things are true at the same time. And I think what we try to do is we try to acknowledge the one that is the scattered house of Israel all over the world, and disavow the house of Judah, who is really representative of the 12 tribes. You're going to see that as we go through some of this stuff today. Mm-hmm. I know that's that's kind of a weird concept, for some, but we got to be honest with what the Scripture says. When the Master says that I have come but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, he didn't say I've come for the scattered sheep, meaning the just the northern house, because that's how it's often interpreted. That's how I've heard it from time to time, that it's just the northern house he's talking about, to go out and get them. And he is going to get them. There's no doubt about it. But take the Master's words at face value for what he's saying. understand the plain meaning of the text. And the plain meaning of the text is, he says, because he's talking to the Syrophoenician woman, and he's telling her, I'm here. I'm here. My main purpose is for these people, because they're lost. The people in Judah were lost. The people in Nazareth were lost. They were the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The scattered synagogues all over Rome, those people were lost. The descendants of the northern house, those people were lost. He came for all of them. And so there's sort of a process that has to be understood. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, in conjunction with this idea that Messiah is in the upper room preparing the disciples, the apostles, to begin the process of being the priesthood. Because how can the nations come? How do the nations come and they begin to understand unless a priest is sent? They have the nations have no concept. They have no idea of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And who's going to teach the nations?
I think on Wednesday you even brought that up. That's why the importance of being set apart, right? Who's going to teach the nations?
Yeah, and because the nations have no concept. They had no idea, and so it was the Jew. It was the 12 tribes. It was the disciples. It was the apostles. Those people became the mouthpiece that Yah would use to start this thing, to get this thing around. We're going to see that. You're going to see this played out in parables. You're going to see this played out in what we're going to talk about today, that this is who Yah used. They were the first step to getting the nations to come in. But it was never supposed to be that the nations come in and then usurp these people or reject these people and exclude them and create some other concept or idea of how to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because we cannot forget he is the God of Israel. That's who he is. And who did he spend 1,700 years teaching how to worship him? The people of Israel. To be the priest to the world, to create other priests, to graft us into that house. So we're going to talk about a little bit about 1 Peter, and I think one of the important things when you read the letters, when you read any of the letters of Paul, Paul is predominantly, most of the letters that we read, he's speaking predominantly to groups that are Gentile, that have come out of paganism, but they're not alone. There are Jews in these congregations. Romans, however, is a book to the Jew. It's obviously it's got mixed. It's got two people in it, but the main concept of the book of Romans is he's writing to Jews, and he's telling them, you were supposed to be the example. You who say do not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, and so you need to know the people group he's talking to correctly understand what's being said.
Doesn't he address them? And he says the real Jew is the inward.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. The real Jew, chapter 2, Romans. He who is a real Jew is he who is one inwardly, whose circumcision is of the heart, not just the flesh, not just practicing their concept of circumcision, but true circumcision, as it has always been throughout the Scripture, from the time of Moses on. It has always been circumcision of the heart, and so. What has I think happened as here we are 2022 looking back at all of history, what has eventually happened is we've separated ourselves from the teaching of these priests. They were the people who knew how to worship God, and now the God of Mount Sinai came and died for them, and that's the story that you need to understand, that the God of Mount Sinai came and died for us. But then now what do we do? How do we live? What
exactly?
What does it mean to worship the God? And we can't just say, and I think this has kind of been the way many have kind of looked at this. Okay, we accept what happened on the cross and the resurrection, and that's good. And then what we've done is we've sort of made up our own way of worshiping him, our own way of doing things that are separate from the instruction that came from the disciples. Or we say, oh, we're following the instruction, but we're rejecting a good portion of it.
Yeah.
And so
my heart doesn't want to do that.
yeah, and those,
I go by my heart, which is terribly wicked, right?
I mean, how many
Exactly.
times have you heard that? I go by my heart, or I'm going to follow the Spirit. Following the Spirit doesn't mean you don't obey. And we're going to talk about this on tomorrow's message. The whole purpose of the Spirit is to help you obey, is to help you understand, because that was the era of the first priesthood. That was the era of the house of Israel. They did not obey. And so a renewed covenant is given, the covenant of the Spirit, that we would now begin to learn. But we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. I don't want to get too much into that. So Peter, now it is in Galatians chapter 2, and let me bring Galatians up. Let me find it first. I should have had this queued up. Galatians, and it's in is it chapter 2?
7 through 9, chapter 2.
Yeah. Let me see. Here we go. Galatians chapter 2 and verses 7 through 9. I think I can fit it all on the screen. Yes, I can. Let's take a look at that. There we go. This is Galatians chapter 2, verses 7 through 9. Now, this is Paul talking to the people of Galatia. Again, a mixed congregation. Many, Gentiles are coming in. And so, there's just like there is in any congregation today, there are people who know a lot, and there are also people in the congregation who know very little to nothing.
Yep.
And you got to be able to teach the people who know a lot, and you got to be able to bring up the people who don't.
Yep,
and
exactly.
do it at the same time. The us, i.e., a shepherd, is what a shepherd's supposed to do. But Saul says something really, really interesting that's reiterated, in other places. Saul, at some point in the beginning of his ministry, he went to the Jew over and over and over again, synagogue to synagogue to synagogue. But he got so rejected. He went through so much tribulation that he gets to the point that he says, "Listen, I'm going to go to the nations." They're listening. They're receiving it. Now, that's not to say that every Jew rejected it. They didn't. A large portion of the Israel of that day did understand who Messiah was, did understand who Yeshua was. And I mean, everybody there at the day of Shavuot, right? How many thousands come into faith or have their faith renewed and understand? So this idea that, the Jews are out of the question, they're out of the story. No, they are the story. Remember Yeshua's words, salvation is of the Jews. We got to take that seriously.
That's right. In Acts, it tells you that even the myriads of priests, right, that believed.
Remember? Yeah, the myriads of priests. And yet there was a lot of people who didn't as well. So both of those things can be true at the same time. They're not exclusive of one another. You got to stop thinking binary. It's only this or it's that. No, both of those things are true at the same time. So here's Saul talking about himself, but also that he's gone to the Gentiles, but he talks about Peter too. So Saul makes his way to Jerusalem eventually to talk with the apostles. And verse 7 says, "But on the contrary, when they saw that the good news to the uncircumcised," that's to the nations, to the Gentiles, had been entrusted to me, even as Kepha, meaning Peter, whose ministry was to the circumcised. And again, when you read circumcised, uncircumcised, that's just, a way of saying
almost like a slang of
Gentile versus Jew. Again, Paul's a Jew, but Paul's a Benjamite. He's part of the house of Judah. He's part of the nation of Judah, but he's a Benjamite. He's a different tribe. There were other tribes represented in Judah. It says, and so let's think about it. Who does Yah send out to the Gentiles? A scholar of the Torah.
Yeah.
Well, and then so if we follow sort of the modern logic of it, that Yah sends out a scholar of the Torah to go to a people who don't know the Torah to tell them that the God of the Torah has came and died for them, but you don't have to keep the Torah. You don't have to obey the instruction.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the logic of that for a second.
What was the use? Yeah, exactly.
Why send Paul?
Mm-hmm.
Why send Paul to them? Because if they don't
Yep.
know about it anyway, and it's not about it anyway, then why send a guy who knows the Torah backwards and forwards, upside down, sideways? It's got the whole thing memorized. Why send him? Why you could just send any, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but you could send any Joe Schmo disciple, to go to them. But Yah didn't. He sent Saul.
That's right. And I think Kepha, right, still had some of the prejudice that he grew up with, because that you still see that as Paul rebukes him in Acts 11, right? Because that's even after the vision in Acts 10. So when he's describing how Yah has made no man unclean, we all know the whole thing the church tries to use as that we can eat pork now. But again, in Acts chapter 10, right, he's dealing with this, right? And it's hard, just like how we came out of Christendom for how many years, we still have these things that we that creep up on us. And Peter still has that, right?
Sure.
They're dealing, the difference. Go ahead.
They're dealing with the traditions of the fathers.
Fathers, yep, exactly.
They're dealing with Judaism, with Pharisaical Judaism. See, and again, that's just another sort of misconception people have. We're not following Pharisaical Judaism. We're not following Judaism. We're following Messiah. We're following his instructions. We're doing what he said to do. So here's Saul. He says, so Peter, we get the information on Peter, while Saul has much fruit coming out of the circumcised, Peter, on the other hand, his job is to preach to the, Paul had it to the uncircumcised, Peter's job is to preach to the circumcised, or the Jew. Verse 8 says, for he who worked in Kepha to make him an emissary to the circumcised also worked in me for the nations. So both of these are going on at the same time. And would it even pop into our minds that as Peter is talking to Jews of all different synagogues, of all different places in Jerusalem, that in any way Peter is telling them, you don't have to keep the law of Moses anymore? Do you really think that's what Peter? Because that's what we say Paul is doing. And in this book of Galatians, they get together and they understand the gospel together. They finally compare notes after many years. And to think that Paul is preaching a different message than Peter is teaching that doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
Nope.
They're preaching the same message, but they're preaching it to Peter, to people who have a background and an understanding, who are tied into the traditions of the fathers, and they need to come out of that, where Paul is teaching to people who have no knowledge, little to no knowledge. So anyway, it says, so when Jacob, Yaakov, Kepha, and Yohanan, James, Peter, and John, who seemed to be supports, came to know the favor that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship in order that we go to the nations and they to the circumcised. So it's not just Peter, right? It's James and John.
John, yep.
Whose ministry is predominantly to the Jew, to the circumcised. So when you read Paul's letter, you got to keep in mind who's the main audience he's talking to the uncircumcised. And when you read Peter and James and John, you've got to keep in mind who's the main audience that they're talking to. And yet we have to put it all together to make one inclusive story. We're not supposed to separate the two and say, well, this was the message for them, but this was the message for this other group. So we use this verse, just sort of to start off the conversation, so that we realize, I hope we realize that in fact, Peter's main ministry was to the circumcised. Why is that important? Well, let's take a look at 1 Peter real quick. And First Peter, and eventually, once we finished with Thessalonians, I think First and Second Peter will be the next books that we look into, because because you get to see he's talking about the same story, the same context. Everything is about the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the key to everything. But here's Peter's letter in First Peter. And this is really important that we get what's being said, because this is the first century, right? This isn't this isn't 300 years later, 400 years later. This is the first century. This is right after Messiah, right? There are already people of Judah, of the house of Israel, scattered from Assyria's time all the way to their time. There are synagogues all over the Roman Empire. And so who does Peter write to? Here's the opening of his book. Kepha, an emissary of Yeshua Messiah, to the chosen, strangers of the dispersion. And then he says Pontus and Galatia. So there were Jews in Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia. Verse 2, chosen according to the foreknowledge of Elohim the Father, set apart by the Spirit unto obedience, and sprinkling of the blood of Yeshua Messiah, favor and peace be increased to you. So who is this letter to? To the scattered Jews. Yep. And we keep saying Jews, we mean the house of Israel, the scattered house of Israel, all over the place. That's who this letter is to. And again, it's not that the information should be different in speaking to the nations, but there's stuff that Peter can say that the nations don't know yet. They don't understand yet. They've got to learn. That's the whole reason in Acts why they start off with those first couple of commandments out of Leviticus. Tell the nations, the Gentiles, to do this, but they'll learn. They've got to learn. Yeah. They're supposed to learn.
And it's pretty wild too, because you see the evidence of the scattered house of Israel in those nations, because in Acts chapter 2, right, when the Spirit comes down, and what do these people from all the nations hear? Their language. They were there for Shavuot, right? They were
Jews.
there for the feast. So these were Jews that were, or scattered Israel that were in these countries, right?
Yep. And proselytes, no doubt, there were proselytes there too. But yeah, predominantly it was people from all over the Roman world, the known world of its day, in synagogues everywhere that came for the feast. Now that is not to say, and this is sort of the caveat here, that not all that are Israel, as the Apostle Paul tells us in the book of Romans. So he's not talking about everyone, who claims Judaism. He's talking about those who understand that Messiah has come, because it changes everything that the way you think about everything that Moses said, the way you think about everything the prophet said, what all of those stories are actually about is they're about Messiah. And so we're not saying that he's saying everybody who is scattered of the house of Israel is the house of Israel, because Saul tells us that is not so. And like you said, who is a real Jew? One who is circumcised in their heart, not in their flesh. And so just like the story of the two sons, there's a faithful son and there's an unfaithful son. And the unfaithful son is going to be destroyed. And what the unfaithful son has done or hasn't done is going to be wiped away. And the city that the unfaithful son is in charge of is going to be destroyed. But the faithful son, who is still a son, is now going to go out and take this message to the world, to teach the world who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who the God of Israel truly is.
Amen.
All right, so we're trying to make that difference there, so you see the difference. But as we read it, we've got to be sensitive in order to really interpret it properly. Who is being spoken to here? And so let's jump into we're in First Peter. So let's look at First Peter and where are we? Chapter 2. Yeah, and I think you might have it up on your screen. Do you have it up on your screen, bro?
No, not yet.
First Peter chapter 2.
Oh, I can read it from my my Bible. I have to just raise it up a little bit.
and let me get to verse 5. Here it is. We're going to go it's actually from verse 5 to 9. Let me see if I can scroll this up just a hair for everybody to see. We can only get to verse 8, and we'll look at verse 9 afterward. So if you want, bro, you can go ahead and read that if you can see it.
Sure. Will be 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 5. You also, as living stones, are being built up, a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood, to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. Because it is contained in the scripture, see, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, chosen precious, and he who believes on him shall by no means be put to shame. This preciousness then is for you who believe, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and the stone of stumbling, and a rock that makes for falling, who stumble because they are disobedient to the word to which they also were appointed. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, in verse 10, who were once not a people, but now the people of Elohim, who had not obtained compassion, but now obtained compassion. And of course, he's referencing Hosea.
All right, let's unpack this for a second. Actually, let me turn
There's
to it
a lot
here.
There's
a lot of stuff here that's hidden. It's hidden manna, but we got to unpack it because it's really, really important. I'm gonna keep the screen up that's there right now because I want to go back, but I want everybody to see this so that you guys can follow along. And we really should have just started at verse 4 too. Because remember, chapter 1 tells us who he's talking to. He's talking to the scattered Jews. Again, house of Israel, scattered amongst the world. Telling them, drawing to him. I'm looking at the wrong screen. Sorry. Drawing to him. I got a different setup here today than I normally do, so I'm trying to get used to it. Drawing to him a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Elohim and precious. Of course, so let's talk about Messiah, right? This is about Messiah.
Yep.
But this thing here, you also as living stones. Well, who's he talking to? He's talking to the Jew. He's talking to those people who have an understanding. And what he's referencing is what Moses told them at Mount Sinai. It was always Yah's intent to make his people a priesthood. Yep. But a priesthood to who? To the world. They were supposed to be a priesthood to the world, to teach the world who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is. But we're going to find out as we read through this, many were disobedient. But these who were not disobedient, they are now being built up a spiritual household. He is building up a priesthood. This is, again, I got to go back and reference. Go ahead, bro.
And no, in verse 4 too, it's important because we know that the scripture says that Yeshua came to his own, right?
Yeah, he came to his own.
They rejected him.
And his own received him.
And who is he? He's from Judah.
Right.
His own.
His own, to the house of Israel. I came but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But many rejected him. But to those who did not, he gave them the authority to become the children of God. Who? The Jews of that day, the Israel of that day. To do what? To be a priesthood ordained to go out and minister to the world of the first century and create more priests and graft us into this priesthood, into this house of Israel. So again, as living stones, you, the believers, the Netzarim is maybe a better way of maybe a way people are more able to understand it. Because you say, well, there's the house of Israel and then there's the house of Israel. And that can get confusing, right? So let's just say they are the house of Israel. Let's just say Netzarim. Because we can't even use modern definitions today. We can't say church, right? Because that has all sorts of connotations to it. Now, I mean, you can, because that's the
Just
word.
means
It
really
church,
assembly, but
assembly, right? But with all the modern definitions of it, so you really can't say that. Or if you're going to be accurate, you want to at least give a caveat there as to what's actually being spoken of. So they are being raised up as living stones. They're being built up into a spiritual house and a set apart, a holy priesthood. Who is? Well, go back to chapter 1. To the pilgrims scattered abroad, to the circumcised, to whom Peter is an apostle to those who have heard. And I got to believe that a lot of what this is referring to is on that day of Shavuot, as you mentioned, there were people from all over the world who came from their synagogues from all over the world who came to Shavuot, who came to Pentecost, right? And they saw it. They experienced it. They saw the gift of the Spirit being given. They saw all the miraculous things that went on and the gifts. And it tells us, right after Peter's message, 3,000, get baptized and believe in who that Yeshua is the Messiah. And then even more, like 5,000, the next couple of days. Well, what do you think they did when they went home?
Yep.
They told their families
and
their friends and their people. And I'm sure they had all sorts of headaches doing it, and some believed it and some didn't. They went out as priests to go and start to minister. And the message to the nations hadn't even started yet, because the message, I guess, first had to go to the house of Israel, to the Jew first, and then also to the Gentile.
That's right.
And what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to, or the priesthood. Again, we're just talking about first century. We are still the priesthood today, but we're just talking about first century. Let's deal with what the context of the book is about first, and then we can extrapolate as to what applies. It says to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings, acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. Now, Peter knows the temple's coming down, and he's going to mention it in this book in a phenomenal, graphic way. Peter mentions the destruction of the temple, that it's coming. So what slaughter offerings
It's the bullocks of our lips.
is this priesthood supposed to offer up? This royal priesthood. And what this makes you, I think, sort of wrap or what we should wrap our minds around is that when Father was speaking through Moses, and this is Exodus chapter 19, because that's where these verses come from. We'll go back there. And again, as Peter's quoting this, don't you think all the people he's quoting this to, that they recognize where this comes from?
Exactly.
And in essence, what Peter is saying is that what Moses was talking about way back then is coming true right now. And I want to emphasize that again. But everybody, listen to what we just said. What Moses was telling them in Exodus 19 about the priesthood and obey and all the rest of that and what they're supposed to be. We'll read it in a second. All of that comes true. It has its fulfillment, its true fulfillment here in Peter, or really at Messiah's resurrection and the giving of the Spirit at Shavuot. That is the fulfillment of what Moses said. See, we tend to think of it, well, Moses said it there, and that's no longer applicable. No, he was telling them what's going to happen, what the total goal is here, what the end result is supposed to be. And, of course, we know all the stuff that happened in between it. But here it is. Here's Peter telling them these scriptures, just like Yeshua says. Let me get off the double screen here so we look a little bit different. Just like Yeshua says at the synagogue in, Luke 4, when he reads through Isaiah, right? And he reads through Isaiah, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, yada, 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 right? The acceptable year of the Lord. And then he closed the book and he says, and this scripture is now fulfilled in your hearing. But it was written like 1,000 years ago. Well, maybe not 1,000, but it was written a long, long time ago. And so it's the same concept, because you got to believe that with Father, Father who is an eternal being, the Messiah who's an eternal being, what he's saying to them at Mount Sinai and its fulfillment, it's but moments that have gone by. Right? It's there is no time with him, but we look at it, well, he said that then, and now something different is happening. No, what he said then is now coming true the way he intended for it to come true. Yeah. This is the royal priesthood he was talking about. Again, that's why Paul then says, not all that are Israel are in fact Israel. So let's go back to where we just were. All right. So we read all this. I lay in Zion. I'm sorry, I keep getting mixed up with the screens here. Because we lay in Zion, yada, yada, yada. Verse 7 is really, really important. Because he's talking about the same things Messiah talks about. This is the parable of the vineyard. He's speaking about the parable of the vineyard here. This preciousness then is for you who believe, the good sons, right? Not the unfaithful sons, the good sons. But to those who are disobedient, the unfaithful sons. This is the story of the two sons. This is the story of the, like I said, of the parable of the vineyard.
Matthew 13, yeah.
Yeah, we'll jump to Matthew 13, but he's talking about those parables. He's not using it in parabolic form. He's just saying it outright. But these are the teachings Yeshua gave. He goes to the vineyard owners. The vineyard owners reject him. The vineyard owners kill him. What do you do to the vineyard owners? You wipe them out. You wipe out their city, and you give the vineyard to other people. To who? To those who are obedient. That's what he's saying in verse 7. This preciousness, this gift, this thing that Moses was talking about in Exodus 19 is now being given to you who believe. But to those who are disobedient, the chief priests, the scribes, the Levites, those people in the temple, the politicians, the kings, the rulers, the leaders of the synagogues, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on, who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is right out of the parable of the vineyard, because Yeshua says these same exact words. A stone of stumbling and a rock of offense that makes for falling. This becomes so important to understanding Thessalonians, because there's a falling away coming. And everybody thinks the falling away is what's happening now. And it's true, there's certainly people that fall away now, but that's not what he's referring to. There is a falling away of who? The unfaithful sons, the people who were in charge, who stumble. Why? Again, let me just highlight verse 8 so everybody can see it. A stone of stumbling, a rock that makes for falling, who stumble. Why?
Because they're disobedient.
Because they're disobedient. They didn't do what Yah instructed to do. They didn't live the way Yah instructed them to live. They compromised everything he had asked of them. But you, again, the you he's speaking to, because I don't want to go back there, but the you that he's speaking to are the people listed in chapter 1. But you, the house of Israel, the circumcised he's talking to, are a chosen race. Again, does that mean that we're not a chosen race? Well, of course it doesn't, because now this leads us to the wedding feast.
Yep.
Get rid of the one servants, send out other servants to go call the good and the evil, right? So that the wedding hall is filled, and that
whosoever will, yeah.
Many are called, few are chosen. So who does Messiah call chosen? Everyone who's invited and comes to the wedding feast, both good and evil, as sent out by what? By his servants, by this initial priesthood that starts here in the book of Acts, that starts in the first century and reproduces itself generation after generation. But what we're reading about is the beginning of it. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation. They are a nation. What nation are they? They are the nation of Israel.
That's right.
A people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Now, you mentioned Matthew 13. I think that's really, really important. Let's jump there, because it'll connect, and I know we're running out of time here. It'll connect. I think it's around verse 40 something.
Yeah, it's in the 40s.
Yeah, here it is, verse 44. It says, "And the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man having found it, hid, and for joy over it goes and sells all that he has and buys the field." This is a wonderful parable. It's about Yah loving the world. He gave his only begotten
John
Son,
3:16,
right?
yeah.
No doubt. But it's also about a treasure, a treasure that was hidden, a treasure that's spoken about in Deuteronomy 19 and is no longer hidden by Acts chapter 2. And now here in 1 Peter is being clearly identified as the royal priesthood, the servants that are now supposed to go out. Because who's going to teach the Gentiles? As people begin to listen to Saul, as people begin to understand, that the God of Israel became flesh, well, who are you going to go to, to get information on the God of Israel? Who's the only people on the planet you could go to that understand who Messiah is? That nation, that people. What's that saying? Who are you going to call, right? Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to call?
That's funny.
This is why Zechariah talks about the nations clinging on to a Jew, saying, "Teach us of your God." Zechariah is talking about the same. It's a prophecy of the same thing, except Zechariah is talking about it. So
they grabbed the Zitzi of a Jew, right?
Grab the Zitzi. It says grab the Zitzi. 10 women grab one man. This is what he's referring to. So here it's about the treasure, and you came up with some neat verses. Go ahead and rattle them off, and I'll find them.
Exodus 19.
Let me just get this off the screen so we don't bug out everybody. There we go. Let me go there. Exodus
19.
19, and what verse?
5 and 6.
Oh yeah, we just said that, verse 5 and 6. Let me jump there. So these are the words Peter's quoting in Peter, right? In Kepha's book. Go ahead, bro, if you can read that.
Okay, verse 5. "And now if you diligently obey my voice and shall guard my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession above all the peoples, for the earth is mine." Right there's the whole parable.
There's the whole parable, right? The whole field.
Yep, from Matthew 13, verse 44. And then verse 6. "And you shall be to me a reign of priests and a set-apart nation. Those are the words which you are to speak to the children of Israel."
Okay. Again, there's him speaking it, and then there is the fulfillment of it. And the fulfillment of it, we now know, just like Yeshua says, this day, this is fulfilled in your hearing. This day, as we read 1 Peter, in the first century, what Moses is saying here is fulfilled at that moment. They are fulfilling their purpose, and will now go out to the highways and byways and invite the good and the evil, so that the wedding hall is filled, and then the guests have to come in white robes. They've got to learn how to get the white robes, and if you don't come in a white robe, you will be kicked out.
That's right.
Wow. So the idea here, or the thing I wanted to measure, is that he calls them a special treasure, which again brings us right back to the Matthew 13. What's the next verse you got?
Deuteronomy 7:6.
All right. Deuteronomy chapter 7. And here is verse 6. Go ahead, read it.
"For you are a set-apart people to Yah your Elohim. Yah your Elohim has chosen you to be a people for himself, a treasured possession above all the peoples on the face of the earth."
And you know what? I love verse 7 too, because
Oh yeah,
Yah did not send his love on you or choose you because you were more
because you were
numerous
great.
than
Yeah.
other people, for you were the least of all people. Uh, but why does he do it? But because Yah loves you,
Hmm.
right?
And the promise to Abraham. Yeah.
He loves you. The oath that he gave to your fathers,
Hmm.
and to show that, he brought you out with a strong hand and ransomed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt.
Yeah. He also tells us a lot. It wasn't for your name; it was for my name's sake too.
Yep, yep.
You know.
So
Um,
there it is. The treasure. Let me go
mhm.
back to it a little bit. What does he want them? He has chosen them to be a people for himself, a treasured possession, a special treasure. So again, go back to Matthew 13. Yeshua is telling us this is what's going to happen. This is the kingdom. That treasure is going to be revealed. It's going to come out. That pearl, that thing of great value is going to come out. Amongst all the other pearls, this treasure amongst all the field, it's going to come out. And who is it? It's the Netzarim. It's the treasure. Go ahead, next one.
Do 14 too.
Verse 14, same chapter.
Yeah, Deuteronomy. These are all Deuteronomy. Chapter 14, verse 2.
Oh, chapter 14. I thought you meant
Yes,
verse
I'm
14.
sorry.
Deuteronomy 14. And verse 2?
Yes. As soon as you pull it up.
No, this is actually kind of funny before you do verse 2. You are the children of Yah, your Elohim. Do not cut yourselves nor shave the front of your head for the dead. Now, obviously, this is a pagan ritual. But did you ever see that video? This guy does this awesome video where he goes to an Orthodox community, and the guy explains why they keep the
He's
long
a
hair.
bald-headed guy
Yeah,
that
yeah,
goes to different.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I don't remember
yeah.
what the guy's name was, but it was really interesting.
Yeah, he does. He does some pretty good stuff.
But it was so sad that the reason for keeping the long curls and the way they're shaved, and what was it that you're not
For
supposed to trim.
not to glean the outside of your farming and gardening to leave for the poor.
Right, right, right. And I heard him
Exactly
say,
exactly what he says is what it means, but they use it to leave their curls long.
I heard him say, I'm like, what? What? No,
Yeah.
no. But
It was
anyways,
almost as bad as Fiddler on the Roof, right? Tradition.
why do you do this? I don't know. Tradition.
Oh
For you are a set apart people to Yah your Elohim, and Yah has chosen you to be a people for himself. And here it is again, a treasured possession above all the peoples, to the Jew first, to be the priesthood, to go out, to make disciples, to teach us, and that priesthood goes on and on. Now, here's kind of an observation, because let's extrapolate this now to the 21st century, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have this anymore, or very few and far between do we have the people of Judah, the people of the house of Israel. And obviously there are people of the house of Israel. I mean, birth-wise, native people of the house of Israel that do understand the message, do understand Messiah, and are worshiping Messiah. So I don't want it to seem like there aren't people. There are. We have in our own congregation, we have people that are natural born of the house of Israel. But we don't have a Saul today. We don't have a Kepha and a Peter of someone of that background. That now, obviously, we have others. We have shepherds. We got teachers that have learned from them. And I guess in one sense, maybe we do have them because we've got the book, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe in one sense, we're being a little philosophical here, if you would. We do have them. We have their words. The problem is we've taken their words out of its historical context.
Yep, out of context, exactly.
And it's caused all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues. There was another treasure. Oh, we did Matthew 13. I think it's Deuteronomy 26.
Yeah, 16 through 19.
Deuteronomy 26 and verse 16.
Yeah, this one it's doesn't use the word treasure, but not in this version. In the King James he does, but um, it says today. You have it up there.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, go for it.
16. Just the top's cut off a little bit. Okay, today Yah your Elohim is commanding you to do these laws and right rulings, and you shall guard and do them with all your heart,
Sorry.
with all your being. It's okay. You have today caused Yah to proclaim to be your Elohim and to walk in his ways and guard his laws and his commands, his right rulings, and to obey his voice. It's a certain theme here, huh?
Yeah, just over and
And
over and over.
right? And Yah has caused you to proclaim today to be his people, a treasured possession. There you go. And he has spoken to you and to guard all his commands. And verse 19, just lift it up a little bit more. So as to set you high above all nations which he has made for a praise and for a name and for esteem and for you to be a set apart people to Yah, your Elohim, as he has spoken. Amen. That's a big
That's a big
I
one.
love that.
That's a good one. It's a big one. And so this idea of this treasure. Now, again, this same story gets told to us again and again and again and again. Whether, like I said, it's Matthew 21, it's Luke, it's Matthew 24, it's Matthew 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, all the parables, all the stuff that there's a faithful son and an unfaithful son. The unfaithful son gets removed. The faithful son is the born again house of Israel in the Spirit to begin this message in the letters of Saul and the letters of Peter and the letters of James and all the rest of them, to make disciples of the nations. This is the story of Revelation chapter 12. The sun and the moon and the stars. Jerusalem has a child, brings forth a child. Who is the child of Jerusalem? Messiah is the child of Jerusalem. He is the one that the serpent tries to destroy, unsuccessfully, at least in the beginning, but does eventually get his claws in him. Messiah gives up his life, but the priest, Judas, they're all motivated by the serpent. The master dies and raises and ascends to the Father. There's war in heaven. There's a conflict going on amongst the people. The stars get thrown to the ground. Jews are going to die. They do die. Many of them die. As a result of the resurrection and the belief in Messiah, that he is the God of Mount Sinai that has come in the flesh. And they overcome. How? How do the Netzarim and this new birthed Israel overcome? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And they loved their lives even to the point of death. Many of them died, right from the beginning with Paul all the way through to the Romans. Many of them died. And then what happens? The serpent goes after the woman, after Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, and births a new children. These new children, this is Revelation 12, I'm thinking like verse 17, these new children, these faithful children, as opposed to the ones who were destroyed by the serpent, the stars that well, tongue-tied here, the serpent going after the woman, the temple, this new birth children, they keep the testimony of Yeshua and keep his commandments. And then do what? Go out to the nations and tell the nations about this story. That's Revelation 12. That's what the whole story of Revelation 12 is about. It's about this. Right. So now this is going to be important because next week we're going to start to talk a little bit about what it means to bring an offering, a slaughter offering, to be the priesthood, because it's going to go in line with Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and what all of that stuff means. So that'll be sort of some of the things we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, that's conversation.
Amen.
Neat stuff, deep stuff, but neat stuff. And it kind of makes us reevaluate everything. And look at it from a different light. And it doesn't take away from who we are. I think that's kind of the fear everybody's had. Oh, well, that's Jewish. And well, yeah, it is Jewish. I get it. It is. There's no way around it. Salvation, Messiah said, is of the Jews. But that's not Judaism. it's Jewish. We're still talking about the walking in Messiah, understanding him as the master, the God who died and rose again for us and is going to resurrect us on that day. That doesn't change that. That doesn't minimize us. But I think there's just far too many that think it does or somehow want to be separated from all of this. And I think that has caused great error as time has gone on.
That's right.
All right, brother, what you got?
No, I just wanted to say, those scriptures that we just read in Deuteronomy, Yah reiterates things not because, for his sake, but our heads are so thick, we need to hear it over and over again, right?
Sure enough.
We're thick-headed people, but I just wanted to say, pray for one another. There's a lot of people with some physical issues going on. Other than that, enjoy the Sabbath. Take it for what it is, the day of rest. Get some rest, hang out with your family, have some fun. And that's it. I love everybody, and Shabbat Shalom. Love you, buddy.
Yep. You too, brother, man. Thanks for hanging out with me. Give my love to the family.
I will. Good conversation, man. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye. Okay, everybody. I hope that you guys enjoyed that conversation, and we're blessed by it. I know we threw some stuff out there. Hopefully that will help you to think in some other lines and ways, and as you go through and read. We're going to talk about 1 Peter and 2 Peter when we're done with Thessalonians. We're going to go through it in great detail, but Thessalonians is definitely the building block to understanding all the rest of this stuff. As Brother Max said, enjoy your Sabbath today, whether you're getting together as a holy convocation and worshiping as a congregation, or you're getting together with family and loved ones in your home. That's a holy convocation. Enjoy this day, relax, have a great time with family and friends. We invite you to join us tomorrow as we get back to work. Join us tomorrow as we have our weekend message. We hope that you'll enjoy that as well. Guys, have a wonderful, wonderful Sabbath. God bless and Shalom.